Paleo Diet. This diet is also referred to as the caveman diet, Neanderthal diet, primal diet, ancestral diet, Stone Age diet, and the hunter-gatherer diet. It is a meat and plant-focused diet which includes foods that were supposedly only available during the Paleolithic period, approximately 2.5 million to 10,000 years ago, before more advanced tools in agriculture were used to grow and produce food. On this diet, you consume the following foods: fresh fruits, vegetables, nuts and seeds that you could gather and dig up. Meat and fish you could hunt and catch with stone tools. Note, our Paleolithic predecessors also consumed parts of the animal such as organs and bone marrow. Also allowed on this diet are animal products that you could collect such as eggs and honey. But what you cannot eat on the paleo diet is anything that presumably wasn't available during that time period. All packaged and heavily processed foods like candy, donuts, cookies, soda, chips, crackers, fast food, etc. All grains, that is, whole grains and refined grains, as well as grain-based products, rice, oats, bread, pasta, pizza, cereal, cupcakes. You can't consume dairy products like milk, yogurt, and cheese. And finally, coffee, alcohol, refined sugars, refined oils, and salt are all prohibited on the paleo diet. Now, there are some slight variations to this, but essentially the paleo diet excludes two major food groups, grains and dairy, and is based on lean meat, fresh fruits, vegetables, and healthy fats. The macronutrient makeup is approximately 20 to 30% carbohydrate, 30 to 40% protein, and 40% fat. Now let's take a look at the paleo diet claims. The basic premise behind this diet is to adopt the diet of our Stone Age ancestors, since they reportedly didn't have the chronic diseases that plague people today, like obesity, diabetes, cancer, and heart disease. Paleo proponents say that modern-day diseases are a result of the byproducts of agriculture and the processing of foods, which humans weren't designed for, such as grains, grain-based products like bread and cereal, dairy products and legumes such as beans, peas, and lentils. Therefore, if you eat like our hunter-gatherer ancestors, you won't suffer from these chronic diseases. That's the basic premise. A fact check on this diet from anthropologists point out the flaws in the premise that there is one single diet that our Paleolithic ancestors consumed, when in fact, their diet was highly dependent on geography, where they lived, and the local climate. Scientists point out the different percentage of foods among hunter-gatherers according to where they live. Take the Inuit, for example, of northern Canada, the coasts of Alaska, and Siberia, who consume mostly fish and meat, with less than 10% of their diet coming from vegetables due to the cold climate and terrain. Contrast that with the Kung people who live in the deserts of South Africa and rely on mostly seeds, nuts, fruits, vegetables, and little meat and fish. As you can see, there's considerable variation in the amount of meat, fruit, and vegetables hunter and gatherers consume based on where they live. So essentially, there is no one Paleolithic diet. Anthropologists point out that the foods our paleo ancestors ate are nothing like today's food supply. Through modern agricultural methods, the desirable traits in fruits and vegetables, like fewer seeds and more flesh, have been selectively bred and grown. Take a look at the graphic published in the National Geographic showing the drastic reductions in the varieties of different vegetables. In 1903, for example, there were 497 varieties of lettuce, and 80 years later, there were only 36. Similar reductions in varieties occurred with tomatoes, cabbage, beets, and more. Wild game or meat is no doubt different than the meat and poultry we buy in the supermarket today. And unlike our hunting and gathering ancestors, I would bet most people do not consume all parts of the animals, like the organs, eyeballs, and bone marrow. Although we can attempt to consume similar foods to those during Paleolithic times, the food supplies are radically different. So, not only is it difficult to define one single paleo diet, it's virtually impossible to eat the exact foods of our Stone Age ancestors. Another claim of the paleo diet implies that humans today haven't evolved for the last 10,000 years to handle the modern day food supply. However, there's some evidence that we have. Take lactose tolerance, for example, the ability to digest and consume lactose, the sugar in milk. Typically, lactase production, and thus the ability to digest milk, disappears after infancy when breastfeeding stops. Over the last several thousand years, some have developed the ability to digest lactose throughout the entire lifespan, with many being able to tolerate a moderate dosage of lactose in a cup of milk, for example. This ability to digest milk sugar after infancy is a result of a genetic mutation that occurred as milk became more prevalent. The mutation allows the gene which produces the enzyme lactase to remain on. Now, as for grains, the majority of the population have the ability to digest wheat, barley, oats, and rye, whereas 1% of the population with celiac disease cannot. And while paleo proponents argue that our Stone Age ancestors didn't eat grains and legumes, archaeologists discovered their residues in paleo fossilized human dental plaque. There's also evidence from mummies of hunters and gatherers that there was plaque buildup in arteries, thus refuting the argument that people who lived during Paleolithic times didn't have chronic disease. Finally, think about this. The short lifespan of people during the Paleo period confounds the argument that they didn't have chronic disease. The average age of the mummies found to have atherosclerosis or plaque buildup was 43, whereas the humans who did not have that plaque buildup was 32. In other words, they didn't live as long as humans are living today, with the average lifespan into the late 70s. Perhaps they would have developed chronic diseases had they lived longer. Let's talk about the pros and cons of the paleo diet. Now, despite the basic premise of the diet not entirely holding up to the weight of the evidence, there are certainly pros to this diet. First is the focus on whole foods and cooking meals at home, including consuming a lot of fresh fruit and vegetables, which by far most Americans are lacking in quantity and variety. This diet is naturally high in fiber, which Americans are also lacking. The average intake is approximately 14 grams a day, whereas women need close to double that amount and men need 38 grams a day. Additionally, consuming a wide variety of fruit and vegetables helps the gut microbiome, which influences our immune system since that's where most immune cells reside. It helps to produce neurotransmitters and regulate inflammation. Another plus to the paleo diet is the fact that this diet is void of processed foods, which often contain very few nutrients but are high in calories. And you know what they are: donuts, cookies, crackers, and snack foods that are made up of refined grains, added refined sugars, added fats, and of course sodium. Most Americans consume excessive amounts of these foods, so eliminating them reduces empty calories, supports weight loss, and likely improves markers of chronic disease. Now, for the cons. Omitting an entire food group, dairy, makes it likely you'll be deficient in calcium and maybe vitamin D, two essential nutrients for bone health and numerous processes in the body, as vitamin D regulates the expression of over 1,000 genes in the body. One short study with healthy participants showed over a 50% decrease in calcium intake after 3 weeks on the paleo diet. And over time, this could lead to osteoporosis and increase the risk of fractures. Elimination of a second food group, grains, leaves out all the nutrients and benefits from whole grains, including it being a good source of complex carbohydrates, which is particularly important for intense exercise and endurance exercise. The dietary fiber, B vitamins, and minerals in whole grains are also needed for optimal health and have been shown to improve blood lipids and lower risk of cardiovascular disease and inflammation. And since all grains are eliminated, there's a risk for developing nutrient deficiencies and potentially negatively impacting the gut microbiome. Legumes like beans, peas, and lentils have shown to have similar health benefits, and avoiding them completely appears unnecessary. With the emphasis on fresh foods, more time is needed to plan, prepare, and cook foods, which requires additional time and more cooking skills, which of course once learned is beneficial. However, subjects in paleo diet studies have reported an increase in the cost of groceries, which may be challenging for some. And finally, participants in research studies also report this diet being difficult to stick to. In one study comparing the paleo diet to a standard diet, participants who followed the paleo diet for 4 weeks reported increased cravings for the prohibited foods as a barrier to adopting the diet long term. Imagine never eating birthday cake the rest of your life. Some of you can handle that, others maybe not so much. So what does the research show about the paleo diet for health and weight loss? First off, most of the studies were short-term trials lasting 3 to 12 weeks. Here's what they revealed. It's effective for weight loss and for reducing waist circumference. Similar weight loss occurs on the paleo diet as the Mediterranean diet, but participants consuming the paleo diet had better improvements in waist circumference and glucose sensitivity. Greater satiety or feeling of satisfaction is reported on the paleo diet, independent of calories or macronutrients. Participants experienced lower blood pressure and improved blood lipids. A couple studies observed the paleo diet being 50% deficient in calcium compared to the regular diet. Subjects reported that it's difficult to adhere to, and there were no significant improvements in markers of inflammation. As mentioned, these trials were all short, 3 months or less. At present, the longest randomized controlled trial studying the paleo diet lasted 24 months and involved obese, post-menopausal women who were randomized to either a paleo diet, which contained 30% carbohydrates, 40% protein, and 30% fat, or to Nordic nutrition recommendations, which was composed of 55 to 60% carbohydrates, 15% protein, and 25 to 30% fat. Unlike the paleo diet, the Nordic nutrition diet included low-fat dairy and grains, similar to the dietary guidelines for Americans that includes all major food groups. The paleo group lost significantly more weight at 6 months, but after 2 years, there was no difference in weight loss between the groups. Both groups experienced similar improvements in blood pressure, C-reactive protein, which is a marker of inflammation, and cholesterol, but there were no changes in insulin or fasting glucose. The paleo diet resulted in significantly lower triglycerides than the reference diet. So to sum things up, based on the body of evidence available to date, this diet appears to be effective for weight loss and certain health markers, at least in the short term, with definite pros including a focus on fresh fruits, veggies, lean meats, and healthy fats while eliminating processed and packaged foods. Some of the cons include higher costs of groceries and eliminating 2 entire food groups, grains and dairy products as well as all legumes, which increases risk of nutrient deficiencies and related health issues.